So we're going to start this last little bit about metabolism with photosynthesis. If you remember, there are four trophic groups. And so when we're talking about photoautotrophs, where do they get their organic carbon? Photoautotrophs. They make their organic carbon from carbon dioxide. Where do they get their energy? They get their energy from photons or sunlight. So photosynthesis is literally using photons to create ATP in order to synthesize glucose from carbon dioxide. This is important. We have talked about the three catabolic processes, and in those ways we're taking that glucose molecule and we're breaking it down into NADH and FADH2 and carbon dioxide so that we can make ATP for anabolic reactions. So, photosynthetic organisms, do they respire? We just said that photosynthetic organisms make glucose from carbon dioxide using photons to make ATP, energy for synthesizing glucose. What do they do with that glucose after they've made it? Of course they respire. So this is an important concept. I'll tell you, I had this really awesome question when I was first teaching in one of the homeworks that I made back when I assigned different homework that said, I thought it would be very cool to think about, how that original mitochondrion that was back in that primordial soup, that prokaryote that eventually lived in endosymbiotically with another prokaryote and eventually became the mitochondria of eukaryotic cells. The fact that that was an obligate aerobe, that original mitochondria, dictates why we require oxygen, why we are obligate aerobes. And so I said, just in a paragraph or so, sit in a dark room with your favorite beverage and come up with what you think we would look like if that original prokaryote had used some other inorganic molecule, like, I didn't give examples, but like fluorine or nitrogen or whatever it was. And an alarming number of students told me that we would be green because we photosynthesized instead. And unfortunately, they missed the boat because photosynthesis is taking light and using that light energy to push a phosphate onto ADP and make ATP, and then burning that ATP to make glucose, right? Because synthesizing glucose from carbon dioxide is building a 6-carbon molecule from a 1-carbon molecule. That's an anabolic reaction, right? So photosynthesis is an anabolic reaction. We're making the ATP and then we're burning the ATP. And so what do they do with that glucose? They have to respire it. So I'm going to explain to you how photosynthesis works, but I don't necessarily want you to get bogged down on learning the steps, because I literally just told you what I think is the most important for you to know. Because somewhere along the way, students get this misconception, and so you don't necessarily need to know exactly how photosynthesis works. You need to know that we use photons to make ATP, and then we burn that ATP to make carbon dioxide into glucose, and then that glucose gets respired in regular aerobic metabolism, catabolism. Okay, so here we go. Photosynthesis. First thing, Now we got a eukaryote pictured here, right? This must be some sort of alga, right? Because it's got a chloroplast, which is membrane-bound organelle. Photons are going to strike photosystem 2. Okay, so that's going to excite chlorophyll, which is a light-absorbing molecule, and it's going to cause chlorophyll to release an electron. Why do we call it photosystem 2 when it's the first thing that happens? It's because it was the second one that was discovered. Now the electron is going to get transported to photosystem 1, and photosystem 1 is going to convert those electrons into NADPH. Okay, so NADPH looks a lot like NADH. Okay, I don't know if you see it there, and I want you to hang on to that. Now, step 3 and 4 here, we have to go back. We lost an electron from chlorophyll. So in in oxidative or oxygenic photosynthesis, the way that electron gets replenished is we take water and we break apart water and we make a proton and we give that electron back to chlorophyll. Now that proton, that's great, that's perfect, because that proton can get pumped across the membrane in the chloroplast. Chloroplasts have all of these little stacks that are called granum, and each little pancake in the stack is called a thylakoid, and each little thylakoid is made up of a membrane. It's like a little squashed cell because it's got a membrane all the way around. And if you've got a membrane, you can create a proton motive force. And now you have broken apart water, so you've made these protons, and what happens to the oxygen? It gets released as oxygen gas. This is why photosynthesis and the fact that we had so many photosynthesizing microorganisms in the original primordial soup when we had Pangea and Earth wasn't an oxygenated globe, these guys contributed to that. These were the ones that were making the oxygen that made our world breathable for us. Okay, so we've now pumped that proton across that membrane in the thylakoid, and now we've created, when we've done it many, many times, we have created a proton motive force. And so now we can use that proton motive force to create ATP. We can also dump that proton onto that NADP with that electron and make NADPH. And that NADPH and the ATP are the energy now stored in the cell. That's how we took photons, sunlight, and we've created cellular energy. And now we get to the anabolic reaction. We get to the synthesis part. This was the photo part, and now we get to the synthesis part. And I just want to back up a little bit. Oops, I backed up really far. When we're talking about photosynthesis, there are two sets of reactions. There's the light-dependent reactions that we just talked about, and then there's the light-independent reactions. So these are the reactions where we don't need light anymore because we've already created the ATP and the NADH. And those are the Calvin cycle. Ooh, excuse me. Those are the Calvin cycle. I forgot that video was there. Okay, I'm going to turn down the volume a little bit, and we'll watch that video. So this is in plants, it said it started, but this is also going to be in any eukaryotic photosynthesis cell because we're talking about chloroplasts. Now we need to get to the synthesis part. Okay? These are the light-independent reactions. So light-independent reactions means we've already made the energy, we just need to burn that ATP and NADH to take carbon dioxide and turn it into glucose. And this is called the Calvin cycle, and the Calvin cycle is called that because it's very similar to, at least in cycle concept, to the Krebs cycle, where we take the product of the last turn and smash it together with an incoming carbon dioxide. And so in the Calvin cycle, and I've got another video for this that's overly complex, but it'll at least have some animation and it'll show you. But we take a 5-carbon molecule called RUBP, and it's there in the red next to the chloroplast. And we smash a carbon dioxide onto that. Now, in order to actually create that bond, we're going to need to burn some energy. And what happens is it gets split, and we need to burn some more ATP, and we need to burn that NADH, and we eventually make something that becomes glucose in this process. So the Calvin cycle is light independent, and that's actually where we are burning our ATP and our NADPH that we made in the photo part of photosynthesis and the light dependent reactions. Okay, here comes the second video. Again, you don't necessarily need to know RUBP, you need to know that this is the light independent and that this is the synthesis part, right? We're synthesizing glucose. Okay, now so far what I've been talking about in the videos that I have showed you are for eukaryotic cells. So it would be algae in our world because we study only algae as photosynthetic eukaryotes. However, bacteria can also photosynthesize. And if you remember back in a previous video, I think the first video, I said that photosynthesis can actually be oxygenic and anoxygenic depending on what their light absorbing molecule is. Algae use chlorophyll, but bacteria can use something else. And so I have one more video, and I just want to illustrate to you via this video that you can still make energy from photons and use that energy to make glucose without generating oxygen. So you have oxygenic and you have anoxygenic. So this is how bacteria do it. Bacteria can also be photosynthetic. If you remember our Rhodospirillum rubrum that we use in lab, that uses a red pigment to photosynthesize. So that video actually shows you both. And now we can take that ATP and NADPH and we can use that to make glucose from carbon dioxide. This is an anabolic reaction, right? Because we have to burn that ATP. And what do organisms do with that glucose? They respire it, right? They run it through glycolysis. They absolutely respire still. Okay, clicker question for you. Without your clicker. Calvin cycle operates during which part of photosynthesis? Ready? One more. Both the light and the dark. Yeah. It's light independent. It doesn't mean it only happens one or the other. It means it doesn't require the light. Okay, so why do we need to know all this? Well, we need to understand microbes so that we can control them. We also need to understand metabolism for its own sake, and also so that we can understand how parts of the cell are made. Now the last little bit of this particular topic is going to be enzymes. I'm going to put that in another video because it really does kind of feel like it's its own thing. So I'm going to end it here, pick up on a